Joining us, along with other guests, is gaming attorney Kate Lowenhar-Fisher. Kate, welcome to State of Nevada.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, Kate, first, some background. The Supreme Court decision, it's based on a case brought to it from New Jersey, where you grew up. Can you briefly outline the arguments that the states made and won?
Sure. I could give you the long, torturous history, but I'll try to keep it very,
That'd be great. Yeah.
straightforward. So here's what happened. In 1992, a very strange law was passed by Congress called the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act, or PASPA. And what PASPA did was it prohibited states from authorizing or regulating sports betting.
Mm-hmm.
So it said, states, you can't authorize or regulate sports betting. But it had a carve-out, a grandfather clause for states that already had sports betting.
Like Nevada.
Exactly right. And Nevada was the only state in the United States that had wide-open sports betting, single-game sports betting. There were a small handful of other states, but they just had minor sports betting offerings. And when the law was passed, it froze the status quo in time. And the funny little wrinkle was, it was the Bradley bill. That's what PASPA was known as, from the senator from New Jersey who co-sponsored it.
Bill Bradley, the former NBA star.
Exactly right. And PASPA had a carve-out that said any state that could pass sports betting within the year also gets grandfathered in. It was basically the New Jersey carve-out. And so the law was passed, and New Jersey couldn't get its act together within that first year to pass sports betting.
Okay.
And so New Jersey's senator cut out New Jersey from his own bill.
Oh.
Pretty funny.
So the lawsuit.
Exactly. So fast forward about 20 years, and New Jersey passed a law to authorize and regulate sports betting. The league sued under PASPA to stop New Jersey. That's Christie won. The case makes it up to the Third Circuit. The Third Circuit said, New Jersey, you lost. PASPA tells you that you can't do it. But the Third Circuit told New Jersey, maybe if you repeal the sports betting prohibition, then you won't be authorizing or regulating. So try again. So New Jersey goes back to the drawing board, and they partially repeal their ban. They basically decriminalize sports betting. That's Christie too. The league sue. It goes up to the Third Circuit. The Third Circuit says, New Jersey, you lost. New Jersey appeals to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court says, we'll hear the case. And that's the case that was decided yesterday.
And what exactly did the Supreme Court decide?
They decided that PASPA is unconstitutional in total and struck it down completely. It was a 100% New Jersey win.
So, and this was really sort of a states' rights decision?
That's exactly right. What the opinion says is it doesn't talk that much about sports betting. It's 50 pages about this concept of commandeering. And what the case is about is that the federal government can't overstep and infringe upon states' rights. So state legislatures can't be commandeered by the federal government. You can't tell us what to do.
As a gaming attorney, you know the legal language that guides gaming in Nevada. Do you think the model for regulating and taxing in Nevada is likely to be one followed by other states? Are you, as one of the few gaming attorneys in Nevada, getting calls already?
Oh, I'm getting a lot of calls, yes.
Really?
And I think that Nevada can provide a whole bunch of lessons. And that's not to sound arrogant on behalf of our state, but we're the ones who've been doing sports betting for many decades, and we have done it well. And our sports books have been run profitably, and it's an extremely slim margin business. So I think that Nevada could be both a resource, a model of how to do it, and also how to tax it and levy fees on it in a way that maintains its profitability. And I certainly like the idea and expect that a lot of jurisdictions will offer some type of reciprocity for those that have been licensed under Nevada's rigorous licensing procedures. And, we're also seeing that already state legislatures that have considered bills that levy taxes that are far too high and would crush the margin on a book are looking to Nevada and saying, okay, how high can we go to actually still draw people to the business?
Are the other states, which are turning to Las Vegas for advice on how to do this, talking about this?
They're definitely talking about it because the NFL and major leagues lobbying machines have been exhorting the states to build in integrity fees into this legislation. But I'm nodding wildly at the phenomenal hypocrisy associated with these claims. And I'd point out two things. One, who has been monitoring betting integrity for the last 40 years? It's the Las Vegas bookmakers. They're the ones who've been in the best position to spot anomalous betting activity, anomalous player activity, and those kinds of things, and have historically done it and done it well without any help from the leagues. I would also point out that the integrity fee comes from the fear that the leagues are not going to be able to get a piece of the action because there's this case out there that nobody wants to talk about. And it's a circuit case called NBA versus Motorola. And basically that case stood for the proposition that the leagues don't own the game data. So they can't start charging some intellectual property fee to the books to use their game data. So now they're thinking, okay, if we can't make money that way, let's charge some silly made-up fee in exchange for nothing.
Well, I don't want to get too far down that road, but I do want to ask one thing. Couldn't they make the argument that, none of you states would benefit at all if we didn't put players and coaches and spend the billions of dollars that we're spending to create the games, these leagues? So without us, you wouldn't have any of the benefits. We deserve a piece of the action.
But they do get a piece of the action. First of all, I would say the leagues are not short of money. But second of all, I would point out that gambling is a huge driver of viewership. What pay-to-play fantasy sports did for football viewership was incredible. So breaking open gambling in the United States is going to drive revenue for the leagues, notwithstanding the levying of any integrity fee, and they know it.
I read something about, very quickly, about a certain Wire Act. Mm-hmm. Can you kind of walk me through a wire? What does that mean in layman's terms for folks?
Sure. It's funny. A few years ago, everybody wanted to talk about the Wire Act, and nobody had heard of PASPA. And now everybody wants to talk about PASPA, and everybody's forgotten about the Wire Act.
Right.
So the Wire Act's a federal law passed, back in 1961 when the
I was
federal.
born.
You
lie.
There's no way.
You lie.
I
No
feel like
way.
it on this show. I feel like it.
And it was aimed at the illegal bookmakers that were, picking up the telephone,
Right.
like Lefty, placing the bets on the phone. And
Your grandfather, Cassandra.
Why are you shaking down the guy who's just trying to put some food on the table? Stop it.
Nothing wrong with it.
Yeah.
And what the Wire Act basically does is it prohibits the transmission of bets across state lines. And it used to be interpreted to mean all bets,
Right.
which is why internet gaming was held up for so long. And back in 2011, it was reinterpreted to mean only sports bets. Mm-hmm. So even if this PASPA law is struck down, repealed, whatever,
Right.
even if we open up the possibility that states can legalize sports betting, they still can't bet across state lines. The Wire Act says you can't do it.
So they would have to you could only bet within your state.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, but it does get a little more interesting because there's this, especially for Nevada,
Right.
because there's an exception in the Wire Act that allows you to transmit information assisting in the placement of the bet or wager across state lines from one state where it's legal to another state where it's legal. So in a nutshell, what that means is Nevada could be the hub, the international hub for all the other states that legalize sports betting, and they could manage their risk by having all these other jurisdictions. So a book in Nevada could say, well, we're heavy on New England, but let's go over there to this other state that legalized sports betting, and let's go light.
Nice.
Hey, Lowenhar-Fisher, thanks for joining us on the podcast today. It's good to see you. We saw each other in London a week ago, so we're both recovering a little bit, but thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So I want to talk about sports betting in this interview. This has become an area of expertise for your firm and you in particular. So let's start with we've got this upcoming Supreme Court decision looming over us, probably in the spring. They're supposed to say something.
I think May is probably a good prediction.
Great. So is this going to make or break the legalization effort, if it goes against the New Jersey, is that going to? Are we back to square one, or where do you come down on that?
No, I think that. I think that the decision on the PASPA case and Christie too, if we're still allowed to call it Christie too,
Yes, Christie too.
now that he's no longer governor,
Yeah.
it's not a make it or break it day. I think that what has become clear is that the attitude in the United States towards sports betting has completely changed over the past 25 years. And I think that no matter what the decision is of the Supreme Court, I think that momentum will lead to some fundamental changes when it comes to sports betting in the United States, no matter what.
Yeah. Well, PASPA is clearly a failed law. I mean, it was supposed to prevent illegal sports betting, and it's actually encouraged it. So you think Congress will address this issue, no matter what happens with that decision?
I think so. And what's pretty funny is that this is probably a real bipartisan issue.
Yeah.
And I think we have a lot of friends on both sides of the aisle when it comes to, if not legalizing sports betting, at least repealing those federal laws that seem to be an impediment to the states passing their own legislation.
Okay. So let's say either we get a favorable decision from the Supreme Court or Congress acts. What is the process at that point when sports betting is open to the state? Not necessarily become legal all across the nation, but each state will have an opportunity to decide on for themselves.
Well, assuming that the decision allows for the states to decide for themselves, unfortunately, I think it's going to be a real hodgepodge.
Yeah.
Because each state is going to be subjected to the local vicissitudes of lobbying their government, their constitution, any applicable Indian compacts. And so I think we're going to get a real hodgepodge of experiments.
And what role do you think the leagues are playing? I mean, we'll get to this 1% integrity fee in a second, but do you think that they're going to be able to pressure these state legislators because they may have a professional team in their state or something like that?
Well, they certainly have deep pockets, and we're certainly seeing that there is that pressure being exerted.
Right.
I mean, at the end of the day, they want a piece of the action, and we know that.
Right.
And there's a case from 25 years ago, the Motorola case, a Supreme Court case, that basically stands for the proposition that the leagues can't charge royalties for that game content. It's not their intellectual property.
Right.
So now they're looking for another angle to monetize it. So I think we're seeing there's going to be a lot of pressure exerted by the leagues to get a piece of the action.
Okay. So we've got a state we're sitting in that has had legal sports betting for decades, and it's been successful. Why don't other states just copy what we have here in Nevada?
They should.
So it would make it easier.
They should, but fortunately, we don't need new legislation here. So we don't need to deal with the political pressures and the crazy fundraising and the lobbying efforts and all of that. And I think that states should definitely copy a successful model if they can.
Right.
But again, they've got all sorts of pressures that Nevada isn't under because we passed our laws long before all of this nonsense.
Right. Well, explain the margins of sports betting. A lot of people think it's just an endless pot of money, but it's not.
It's remarkable, the misunderstanding of that. When I see some of the speculation about numbers, there are two things that I think are going on. One, there's a focus on handle,
right?
Which is, of course, the amount of money being bet, not on anybody's profit margin.
Right.
And so throwing around $400 billion, boy, that sounds like a lucrative business.
Right.
And I think the other thing is when I hear speculation about profit margin, if you reverse engineer the numbers, it looks as though the assumptions are we're like Australia or something, which has a 10 to 12% hold with their sports books.
Right.
We don't. The best run sports book in Nevada has about a 4.6 to 4.8% hold.
Right.
That's it. It is a slim margin business. It is an amenity for casino customers. It is not a cash cow if done well.
You did mention the federal excise taxes. Is that an impediment if it goes up, or is it okay the way it is now, do you think?
It seems as though it's okay the way it is now.
Yeah.
It's been at 0.25% of legal wagers for a long time. I don't remember off the top of my head for how long, but when it dropped to that 0.25%, the sports books reopened in Las Vegas.
Right.
There aren't many standalone because, again, it's such a slim margin business.
Sure,
but at 0.25%, it makes it viable. But if we add any of those other handle taxes, like the integrity fee, or we raise the federal tax rate, the excise tax, then we're going to have an economic viability problem.
Right. Okay. So another issue is the Wire Act. In 2011, when the DOJ issued their memorandum that kind of legalized iGaming, in states that want to legalize it, it specifically said no sports betting across state lines. So that is definitely in place, and that's going to be an impediment to profitability as well.
Absolutely, and it's amazing. A few years ago, nobody had heard of PASPA,
right?
And now everybody's talking about PASPA, and very few people are talking about the Wire Act.
Right.
Because the Wire Act would, of course, prohibit sports bets from going across state lines.
Right.
So any sportsbook operator could only be taking bets from within the state that is located.
Right.
And so the Wire Act is a huge impediment to this market.
So is there going to be an effort, do you think, by the states and Congress to amend that or even get rid of it?
Maybe not.
Yeah.
Because the interesting thing about the Wire Act is there's a safe harbor in there for information assisting in the placement of bets or wagers.
Yeah.
So if you are transmitting information assisting the placement of bets or wagers across state lines from a jurisdiction where it's legal to another jurisdiction where it's legal, that's okay under the Wire Act. So I could see some of the larger sportsbook operators being very interested in keeping the Wire Act the way it is, because they're in a position, if they're operating in multiple jurisdictions, to do some global risk management in sharing information, so that if they're heavy in one jurisdiction, they can offset in another jurisdiction in terms of their betting. So there are a lot of parties that might be interested in keeping the Wire Act the way it is.
Okay. And that would also, however, limit the size of the market in any particular state.
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
You have potentially the liquidity problem, just as though, just like when we had internet poker, we joked about when Delaware signed on, well, great, we have another 9 people who can participate in poker.
And, New Jersey's done very well with their iGaming, but they're pretty much tapped out now. They need to do interstate compacts, and I know that's in discussion with them, but if they get sports betting, they're gonna hit the ceiling pretty quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what happens.
Yeah.
So we might need to do something about the Wire Act.
Great. So what do casinos have to do to prepare for this possible legalization of sports betting? What are some of the steps they have to take?
Well, I think there are a few things. I mean, I think there are the practical steps. Do they want to physically accommodate having a race and sports book?
Right.
It's a really big footprint. Is it something that is very attractive to their customer base?
Right.
Does it serve their demographic? Will they be able to offer it via app on their phone?
Right.
I mean, the brick and mortar customer is dwindling.
Right.
I personally have a sports betting app, and I won't mention the name of the bookmaker, right? And I do it from the comfort of my couch.
Right.
And I'm not even a millennial.
Right.
So I think understanding your market, understanding whether the footprint of your casino makes sense, obviously making sure that the law makes this something that is economically viable for you, and figuring out the partners. Are you going to use a third-party bookmaker because you have no experience doing it yourself?
Right.
That is figuring out your relationships, where you're getting the data, who's going to run your book, getting those things kind of set up.
Right. Yeah, and as you mentioned, it's difficult to run it on your own. You have to have a lot of expertise in-house, and it's such a small margin anyway. So, here in Nevada, there's very few, independent casinos that run their own book. They bring in William Hill or Cantor Gaming or CG Technologies now, or one of the others. The large chains, they have an in-house things, but they have a lot of casinos. So do you think the other casinos in the country are going to have to consider those type of arrangements?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think they'd be crazy not to.
Right.
Bring in somebody that knows what they're doing and who can do that global risk management I mentioned.
Right.
So they're not as constrained by having only a tiny marketplace of information that they can use.
Right.
So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, sure. And we just got back from London, went to the ice show, and probably 30% of their floor is occupied by companies that have sports betting products, either service or information or something like that. So, how are those companies going to play into an expanded industry in this country?
Well, I think they're trying really, really hard.
Right.
I think some of the larger ones seem to be lobbying for laws that provide you must use our service
Right.
to get game information. That would be pretty scary, pretty anti-competitive.
Right.
So that I'd like to think those kinds of lobbying efforts won't work. I think the other thing that they can do is really to get a jump start. I would say get your product approved here. Get it reviewed by GLI, for
Sure.
example, using Nevada standards. If it's something that would require individual licensing, like you have a cashless wagering
Sure.
system or
Right.
that kind of thing, get found suitable, get a jump
Right.
on everybody else. And probably if you adhere to Nevada standards,
Right.
you'd likely be very, very competitive. But there are only a few players that provide
Right.
this
Oh, absolutely.
information.
Yeah.
There are very, very few.
In this country.
Yes.
That are licensed right now.
There are, I can think of maybe 3 in Nevada.
Right.
So it's an uphill climb.
Right. But at the same time, there is a little reluctance from the European companies to come to this country because the regulations are a little more stringent here than they are in European circles. So, what would you say to those companies, who are saying, "Well, we're not going to go through that kind of scrutiny"? Do you agree with that, or do you think they're overstating the problems that they'll face here?
I think they're overstating the problems that they'll face here.
Yeah.
I mean, there have been plenty of foreign companies that have been found suitable in Nevada.
Right.
And so the idea is, it's on the one hand, it's intrusive and a difficult process because we want to ensure
Sure.
integrity in the system. Let's go
Right.
back to integrity.
Right.
That's actual integrity.
Yes. Definitely.
And so that the public, it isn't only objectively fair, but the public perceives it as
Sure.
fair. And the reality is, once you've come through the other side of that, you've gotten the stamp of approval in terms of the quality of your operations, the
Right.
quality of the individuals involved, and you've just thrown up a huge barrier to entry for the people that don't want to bother going through the process. So I would say make your cost-benefit analysis. Is
Sure.
it worth it to you?
Right.
Then do it.
Right. And would you suggest Nevada being the starting point?
Of course, of course.
Just because we're sitting here?
Partly because we're sitting here, but of course we know what we're doing.
Right.
And we've been doing it longer than any other state, and it's a very, very professional regulatory process. We have professional investigators. We have very progressive regulators. There's no hostility towards new products or any of that. On the contrary, it's always about bringing in new products and being in the vanguard of what's going on in the United States. So
Right.
there are a lot of reasons why Nevada makes sense.
Right, no question. So let's wrap it up with what you see happening within the next year or so, one way or the other with the court case.
Yes, I think there's a good shot that the actual decision in the Christie 2 case is perhaps incoherent. There's probably a splitting of the baby that's going to go on.
Right.
Because, of course, I don't think the United States Supreme Court cares about sports betting.
Right.
I think they care about commandeering principles,
Right.
preemption. So I think the decision in the case is going to be bright lines about constitutional relationships,
Right.
not about sports betting.
Right.
So I think that might drive Congress to perhaps just repeal PASPA, this very strange law.
Right.
And then I think the states will experiment subject to the constraints that we've talked about. I think the world has changed. Well, I think the United States has changed
Right. Yes.
when it comes to sports betting.